Yeah. Well, here I am, ladies and gentlemen, with another experiment of the Irv Homer career, and we're broadcasting live on computers, I suppose, and it's going to be a very interesting experiment. My frustration level, of course, is like the fire dog that hangs out in the firehouse, and he says, well, the dog's just going to lay there, and when the bell rings, the dog jumps up on the fire engine and takes off. There are so many areas that have been of my interest that I wanted to get into that I have to say that I've become lazy. And I'm not going to say that I don't have the time. I'm not going to say that there's a reason for it. It's just that I'm lazy. But there are certain things that trigger me, and through the efforts of my son Ron, who said, come on, Dad, let me try this thing out, go live on television, see what happens, see how many people are listening, see if your points of view are any more interesting than what is being demonstrated right now on television. I've decided to go ahead with this experiment and see if I can't get my point of view across, and maybe it will help you understand some of the problems that we have today in a perspective that is not being brought on radio or television. You must remember, folks, that talk radio, talk television is geared for one purpose only, and that is to make money for the stockholders of the broadcasting industry. It's got nothing to do with providing you with anything other than making money for the owners. I see nothing wrong with that. This is capitalism, blah, blah, the old cliche. But its in purposes to make money. And whether they tell the truth, whether they give you the whole story, whether they don't, is immaterial. It's got nothing to do with the content of the programming. I don't want to pick on anybody as being a scapegoat for my comments, but these people are in the public view and they enjoy a tremendous audience. They make a lot of money, and it's extremely difficult for me, for example, to believe somebody who's making $1 million a year to worry about you and I spending $4 for a gallon of gasoline to put in their tank. They do not feel the pain. Believe me, they do not feel the pain. I've been very fortunate in the broadcast industry that I made a lot of money in it. Make no mistake about it, and I didn't squander it away. I don't have a high lifestyle. I live in a very middle class neighborhood. I guess my home must be worth around $350,000, $400,000. It's paid off. It's none of your business. But I just want to make the analogy as to where my point of view is coming from. So the $4 a gallon gasoline, $4.50 a gallon doesn't bother me. I think it's outrageous, but that's the name of the game. I predicted it would go to $5 a gallon when I was broadcasting on commercial radio and television. For those of you who are listeners, knew that I was saying it, and people said, oh, you're crazy, Irv, I'll never go to that. But it is now $4.09, $4.15, $4.20, and you're going to be paying more. There are ways of, cutting down. Number one, I suppose, is if you're leasing an automobile for $600 a month, get out of that deal. Take the hit and get out of it, and get yourself a car that's going to cost you $200-300 a month. There are many ways to do it, and I'm not going to go in there and give you a lecture on how to save your own money. You got yourself into this mess, so get yourself out of it. I want to deal with a couple issues. Number one is with a guy that is now the number one man in the Philadelphia market, I suppose, according to his own himself, who I know and considers me to be a pain in the ass. Well, I am a pain in the ass because when you make stupid remarks and you get on particular crazy programs that don't make sense, it's because of your ignorance. My dear buddy Mike Sparkanish, who eventually will be moving on to network television. Michael has an appeal to the ignorant, and they're going to play his game. Constantly is concerned about the fact that Osama bin Laden is in Pakistan and we can't go in there. And I listen to Michael when I feel like that I'm constipated. And so listening to him in an interview with John McCain, criticizing John McCain that we don't go into Pakistan and we don't go after Osama bin Laden. And why don't we go into him? Apparently, Michael doesn't know many things, as many of you folks don't know. And sometimes I even forget about it. But it's important to realize that our venture, ladies and gentlemen, in Afghanistan and Iraq and in the whole Middle East is a United Nations function. It is not a unilateral American venture. We have allies. The United Nations has a tremendous input into what we can do there and what we can't do. And Michael, please get a copy of the United Nations Charter and read for yourself why we cannot go into Pakistan to go after Osama bin Laden. The United Nations has never given us permission to do that. Our allies know it, and Boobas America doesn't know that. But the United Nations Charter dictates specifically that unless there is an internal problem in a country, they approved the whole move into Afghanistan and Iraq by the United, remember the coalition of the willing? Well, the United States is under an obligation to the partners that we have in the United Nations to adhere to the United Nations guidelines. And those United Nations guidelines do not give us permission to go into Afghanistan, period, or to go into Iran or any other country other than the dictates of what they said. And that is you can go into Afghanistan and into Iraq. We had the same problem during the Vietnam War. We were forbidden to go into certain areas because the United Nations had never sanctioned that we could go in there. Now, when we declare war ourselves, ladies and gentlemen, we can go any place we want to. It's our war. And so we will go into those areas because we do not adhere to the United Nations guidelines. But when you're involved in Vietnam, you're involved in Korea, you're involved in any of the countries that we've been involved in, you're involved through the graces, the good graces of the United Nations. And as a result of being in their good graces, we are obligated to follow their guidelines. One of the things that frustrated me during the Vietnam War was the fact that there was a Security Council in the United Nations. There are 5 members of the Security Council. A lot of times, members in that Security Council are not friends of the United States. However, all moves, all military operations must be reported to the Security Council of the United Nations, which means our enemies now know what our plans are. And all during the Vietnam War, where I had a foster son who served 2 tours in the Marine Corps, the Security Council knew every move that the United Nations forces were going to make in Vietnam. And many of the time, Paul said to me, he said, I can't figure it out. Why do they know we're making an attack? How did the North Vietnamese know it? Well, they knew it because the Security Council told them. One of the problems we have now with the insurgency and with Al-Qaeda and with the Taliban is that they know where and when we're going to strike. And that's because the United Nations forces must report to the Security Council of the United Nations what their obligation and plans are. Now, if you read the paper, if you informed yourself or read the United Nations Charter, you will know that the UN Charter giving the United States and its coalition of the willing the opportunity to go into Afghanistan and into Iraq ends in December at the end of this year. It will then have to be renewed, or we will have to withdraw our troops. Now, today is Sunday when this broadcast is originating. If you read in the paper, in the New York Times this morning that I read, or in the Philadelphia Inquirer, it specifically states that Petraeus now, who is the leading general of the United States forces in the Middle East, is saying we should end up with some type of troop reduction by the end of the year. Well, that's not just because he feels that way. General Petraeus knows that unless the United Nations agrees to extending the occupation of Afghanistan and Iraq by the end of December, we must pull out. Now, Obama and McCain are not asking these questions. They don't refer to them. The reporters and the people who interview them on all of the television programs never say, how long does the United Nations give us permission to be in Afghanistan and Iraq? They do not ask the question, and so as a result, you don't know. And the biggest problem with the media today is not that they're socialist or capitalist or this other silly nonsense. It's the fact that they do not give you the information necessary for you to get your mind straight. You just don't know. Now, remember, folks, we do have a coalition of the willing. Remember, the British are there, the Italians are there. We have some 22 countries that are also part and parcel of this Iraq, Afghanistan invasion. Now, of course, we have that smug attitude that we're better than anybody else, and only American troops are dying. Well, British troops are dying, Italian troops are dying, other countries that are participating are dying. They have pressures put on them by their people. If the United States wants to go it alone, let them go it alone. So all of the prime ministers and all of the heads of the other countries that are part of our coalition know what's in the United Nations Charter. They have to answer to their people. So we cannot be the big boy on the block because we're not there alone. If we declared war on Iraq, if we declared war on Afghanistan, we could go in there without any interference from the United Nations whatsoever. What would probably happen is the UN would then get a military force together and join in for those indigenous countries and attack us. So the ignorance of the people like Michael Smerconish, who get you all excited and all outraged and screaming and yelling about, we all go in there throw something about, haven't got the faintest idea of how the United Nations works and what our obligation is to the UN. And that's why many years ago, the John Birch Society had screamed, get the United States out of the UN and get the UN out of the United States. They know that we are obligated to report to the Security Council on a monthly basis every military action we take, the amount of military equipment we send in there, the number of troops we have in there, the number of actions we're going to take. They are required by the United Nations to report to the Security Council. One other thing that is obvious to me is the lack of knowledge that people know, or they not reported on the media. In addition to the 130,000 or 160,000 troops, and I don't know what the troop level is today because I don't believe what I read in the paper anyway. The fact of the matter is that we have over 160,000 American civilians working in Afghanistan and in Iraq, building Iraq, rebuilding our so-called embassy there that is the biggest embassy in the entire world, the cost of which has escalated up to $300 million. Now, that doesn't look to me as if we're ready to pull out, and we've got close to $300 million or more invested in building an embassy there that is a city within a city within a state. And so, my dear friend Michael Smerconish, who I admire because he's the greatest self-promoter that I've ever seen in the business, next to the former Father Coughlin. Michael can promote himself, and he does a hell of a job at it, and I admire him for it. But at least, Michael, get your facts straight. And other Michaels out there, get your facts straight on what our obligation is to the UN. And if you folks want a copy of the UN Charter, you can request it from the United Nations. Now, allegedly, all of you folks out there know what's in the American Constitution, and you know your Bible, and you know all these other things, which sometimes I doubt that you really have ever read the Constitution or read the Bible. However, get a copy of the UN Charter from the United Nations and read it. It will clear up a lot of problems in your mind. It'll get the fuzzballs out of your head as to why and when things are going on as they are going on. So if we reduce the troop strength that is in Iraq and Afghanistan, what do we do with 130,000 private American contractors that are there? What do we do with them? One of the battles that we have in Iraq and Afghanistan is, what role in security do these private contractors have? They have their own security so they can kill Iraqis or Afghan people without reporting to the military. Now, who tries them? Does the United States try them? Does the United Nations try them? Do the local courts under the law of Sharia in Afghanistan or in Iraq try them? You don't know. These are the complications that exist within this confrontation that we're involved in that leads to the frustration and the reason I've kept quiet all these months since I've been out of radio. It is just so frustrating to me going back in my career, that I've tried to inform the public that nothing has changed. Nothing will change until the public, you the public. And I don't care whether you're Spanish speaking, I don't care whether you're English speaking, I don't care whether you're Catholic, Jew, black, white. An uninformed public is a public that scratches its head and picks its nose and says, we're going to have change. But change is not going to happen unless you have a public that is well informed as to what is going on and why it's going on. And one of the reasons it's going on is because they can get away with it adhering to the law. And you've heard people say, well, Bush did not break the law and this one didn't break the law. They are following the UN guidelines, which you do not agree with because you do not know what they are. Now, in all of the time that we've been in Afghanistan and Iraq, which is almost 8 years, we have never been condemned by the United Nations for any action that we've taken. For example, just this week, the United States airstrike, we admitted to the airstrike. It was our planes and our pilots killed 47 people at a wedding in Iraq. Civilians were killed as a result of our action. Now, who tries them? Are they war criminals, those pilots? Is it bad intelligence? Does the UN charge them? Does the Iraqi government charge them? What court will charge them? Innocent people are dying because we, the public, who supports this war, supporting our troops, paying our taxes, whatever it is, we support the war. We killed 47 people at a wedding, period. The United Nations will not under any circumstances condemn us because the UN gave us permission to do it. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to be informed, get informed on what our obligation under the UN Charter is. And maybe poor Michael will grow his hair back on his head again if he would read the UN Charter and find out that we are not permitted to cross the border into Pakistan because the United Nations have not given us permission to do it. Period. Case closed. If you recall, Israel has been condemned more by the United Nations than any other country in the UN since its existence since 1948. And the reason it gets condemned is because it does things in its own interest that are not UN approved. Just 8 weeks ago, they bombed Syria. You didn't read about it in the paper. They took out a nuclear site in Syria, and they were condemned in the United Nations. Did Syria do anything about it? No, because Syria violated the UN agreement that they were not to build offensive nuclear weapons. And when Israel made the presentation to the UN said, well, we'll slap your hand, but we know that Syria violated the agreement that we have with the United Nations under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and so it was one country violating the UN Charter and another country counteracting, and so you both violated, so we won't condemn, but we'll make it look like we're going to condemn Israel. So it's the ignorance, ladies and gentlemen, of the masses, and what bothers me more is the misinformation and the twisting of radio and television today. Why do I get upset over radio and television? I've got to make myself a little more comfortable here. I'm speaking now from the Homer bunker, unbeknownst, unlisted, like the drug addict, Limbaugh, talks about his EIB network. So I'm broadcasting from the Homer bunker. No, I've never taken drugs. I've never been a druggie, but you have, Rush. You're a drug addict, period. Remember that. You may be a recovering drug addict, but you're a drug addict. And the people don't care about it. They only care about the kid down the street who's a drug addict who may be recovering. And if you want to hire him, you want to hire him. But you people idolize a drug addict. The man is a drug addict who sat behind a microphone, behind a television set, speaking with drugs in his brain. So where's the fairness? We'll get into that a little bit later. A couple of crazy statements that came out this week, and that is from my dear friend Elmer Fudd. Phil Gramm, Senator, is quite a character. He is also a brilliant accountant, knows finances very well. Made a statement this week, as he did when he was appearing with John McCain, that Americans are whiners, and we're not really in a depression. It is a mental recession. And they jumped all over Phil. Oh my God, he's the worst thing since indoor plumbing. Oh, blah, 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 blah. Yes, Phil Graham's a conservative. So you're going to say, well, Homer, you're a liberal. I'm not. I'm not a liberal or a conservative. I deal with issues. And if you've listened to me for any length of time, you know I deal with issues. Well, Phil Graham was right. This is a mild recession, a mental recession. That's right, it's a mild recession. And we are a nation of whiners. We are a nation of whiners. You want to know the list of the people who are the biggest whiners? I'll tell you who the biggest whiners are. Rush Limbaugh. Without him whining 3 hours a day about how bad Hillary Clinton was and how bad Bill Clinton was and how bad the Democrats are and you feminazis out there, Rush Limbaugh couldn't make a living. So, Phil Graham, you're absolutely right. Rush Limbaugh is the biggest, highest paid whiner in the United States. Every day, whine, 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 whine. The Democrats, the liberals, the socialists, you hear it all the time. So, Phil, you're not speaking to the left wing in America. You're speaking to the right wing. So you folks who are conservatives better realize that your people are the biggest, most vocal whiners on radio and television in the United States today. Sean Hannity, another leading whiner in America. I can assure you that Rush Limbaugh, in the article that appeared in the New York Times last week, indicates that he isn't even in a mild recession, making $100 million a year, living in a bunker that costs, what, $38 million, flies his own jet plane. This man couldn't care less about you paying $4 a gallon for gasoline than the man in the moon. So Rush doesn't feel your pain, ladies and gentlemen. He makes you feel good. But he lives so far above the average person in America that he is not suffering from any mild recession whatsoever. So, Phil Graham, you're right. Rush is not suffering from a mild recession. Sean Hannity, another one of America's leading whiners, the number 2 man on syndicated radio and television. Whine, 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 cries and boo-hoos and a clamor and socialists and the liberals and blah, 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 blah. You hear it on a daily basis if you monitor his program. So now we have 2 of America's leading whiners that Phil Graham was referring to, probably. Now, they don't think they're whiners, see. They think it's the liberals. They think it's the black people whining and the Spanish people whining and the poor guy paying $4 for a gallon. They think, no, the biggest whiners are syndicated broadcasters like Rush and Sean. And my favorite girl, Laura Ingraham, who I think needs a good orgasm, is what I think that gal needs. She constantly talks about socialism and hasn't got the faintest idea of what socialism is. And I wish people would learn what they're talking about before they talk about it. The average person is viewing this thing right now, or in the United States, has no idea what socialism is. And one of these days, I may explain to you again the difference between socialism and state capitalism. We live now under state capitalism. We do not live under socialism. There has never been any country in the world that has lived under socialism. There isn't any country now under socialism. But Laura Ingraham and her girlfriend, Ann Coulter, another one, excuse me, who probably needs a good orgasm. I just can't picture how they would ever have one, but they both need it. Ann Coulter is about the most frustrated, frigid woman I've ever seen in my life. Also a whiner. And makes millions of dollars whining, writing books about whining and whining. When are you conservatives going to stop whining? And, of course, the local fellow who I really feel sorry for more than I admire, and that's Dom Giordano. I really feel sorry for Dom. He is the whipping boy of that radio station. If you listen to Dom, he's on in the morning, he's on in the night, he's on in the afternoon. Dom will go any place or any time for anything. I don't think he makes a lot of money either. I don't know what he makes. I mean, it's none of my business. But he's always whining about something. And, of course, the real crazy in the broadcast media is a fellow by the name of Michael Savage. That's a real whiner. I mean, this guy is like, his elevator does not go to the top roof. So if you want to talk about the whiners, Phil Graham, let me tell you that the biggest whiners are on the right. The biggest whiners happen to be the conservative broadcasters. And why do I pick on conservative broadcasters, ladies and gentlemen? Having been in the business for over 45 years, the criticism of the Limbaughs and the Hannitys is the mainstream media, right? The mainstream media, ladies and gentlemen, the Inquirer, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the New York, are not licensed by the government to provide fair and balanced broadcasting, or printing rather. There is nothing in the government that says that you have to print both sides of a story. They're not licensed by anybody other than the usual licenses that be in business in America, pay their taxes, but they are not obligated under any stretch of the imagination to be obligated to their readers and making a presentation of the news. Radio licenses and television licenses are. You out there viewing this thing today or listening to other programs that I've had are the owners of radio and television airwaves, not Viacom, not Comcast, none of them, Evergreen, none of them. We own the airwaves. And when you have broadcasting stations and broadcasting networks, the size of which some of these are, presenting one point of view on a daily basis across the board, that is a violation of what the licensing of radio and television stations are about. Now, I don't care. I didn't write those laws. I didn't write those laws. And so you hear the Laura Ingrams and the Hattie, oh, they're going to impose a fairness doctrine. Well, we're fair. We let a caller get on the air with an opposing point of view. For what? Most radio stations have a 2-minute set time. The caller's allowed 2 minutes to make their point and off. So when you have a Laura Ingraham, a Sean Hannity, a Rush Limbaugh on for 3 hours a day, and you with an opposing point of view are allowed 2 minutes maybe once a month, this, in my opinion, folks, is not fair and balanced broadcasting. And I don't care what they say. I have been banned from more of these stations by calling in using my real name than Patch Hellamile. You will never hear with any clarity or dignity an opposing point of view of anybody who has been in the business, who knows how these prostitutes work, who know how the screener works, who know how the person who monitors the program works, who knows how to overtalk the caller after the caller hangs up. And this media today, the licensing of radio and television stations today, is a total and complete disgrace. So don't let these guys and gals tell you that, oh, we're fair and balanced and we give you an equal opportunity to present a point of view, because they do not. No way do they do it. And this is why Irv Homer will not volunteer or even apply for a job on radio or television. I won't do it. I will not adhere to some guideline when the program director of WPHT, when I finally voluntarily left on that Sunday night program, said to me, well, you know, Irv, we're a conservative station. And I said, Grace, when were you licensed to be a conservative station? So the biggest whiners in the media are the guys, the Limbaughs, the Hannitys, the Laura Ingrams, the Ann Coulters, the Giordanos, the Michael Savages, and yes, I'll throw Michael in. Michael Smerconish has, at one time, was totally to the right. Now he's liberalized his program a little bit with some idiocy with these TC and G. I don't know what he's doing over there. I haven't got the faintest idea. I try my best. I listen to his interviews, which are great. But when it comes to those other two amateurs there, I'm not interested in them. Let them make a living, let them be well and be happy, but that's not my cup of tea. I want information. I want to learn something from a radio station, a television station, a newspaper that I don't know. I want to do my own research, dig in, and find out what is going on. The inside story a couple of weeks ago that I appear on occasion, it has become so academic and boring, I can't watch it any longer. I just try to watch it today, and I switched over to the movie Fatal Attraction. And so I had mentioned about 4 weeks ago, my last appearance on Inside Story on Channel 6 as an inside story, that the casinos would never be built on the riverfront in the city of Philadelphia. Never be built there. Today, big discussion on the casinos and blah, blah, blah. They will not be built on the riverfront. I know it from inside. So today, there was a big discussion on the riverfront gambling, blah, blah, blah. There will be no gambling in Philadelphia, period, until the casinos are permitted to have table games in the state of Pennsylvania. These companies will not build slot parlors. Where I got the information from, why I'm so secure in what I'm saying right now, I'm not going to reveal to you. But Inside Story is supposed to be it was at one time, the top-rated show on Sunday morning. I think their ratings now are about 50% of what they were before, when Brian Tierney, Carol Celine, Claude Lewis, and I were regulars on the program. I don't think their ratings today are that great. But I had mentioned as an inside story that there would never be casinos, and they all poo-pooed, and they said, well, Mark O'Donnell was the moderator, Monica was on vacation, and he said, oh, we've got that on tape. Well, if you have it on tape, why don't you play it today? I still maintain, folks, and I know for a fact that you will never see casinos on the riverfront in Philadelphia. And one of the questions is, I wonder how many of those panel members on that panel of Inside Story today ever went into a casino and gambled. Gambling is a hidden tax. That's my dog, Shayna, and she doesn't like when I do this type of talking. So we're going to deal with gambling in the future. And, of course, the state representatives want it because it is a cash cow. But when I said, going back to Phil Graham's comment about being in a mild recession, let me get this straight in my head. The casinos in Atlantic City, I think, generated $311 million last month. $311 million. That is from the gambling revenue, not from the non-gambling revenue, not from the restaurants, not from the swimming pools, not from the hotels. From gambling alone, $311 million, I think the figure was. The figure in Pennsylvania was in the millions of dollars. Millions of dollars. Now, let's see. I'm a business executive that owns I own shares in the oil companies. Okay, I'll admit it. I own stock. So when gas goes up, my portfolio goes up. So I'm happy as a pig in mud. So now I'm paying $4.07 for a gallon of gasoline. And I hear some guy crying while the casinos did $311 million last year in Atlantic City. Well, folks, if we're in a recession, you would think that restaurants, movies, theaters, gambling, casinos would be hurting, that they would be in a mild recession. So the casino dropped 2% of their revenue. They only made $311 million last month. So I own oil stock, and I get revenue, income from my oil stock. and I see the figures that the people are taking and throwing their money away in a casino, should I feel sorry for the general public? Why should I feel sorry for a public who throws millions and millions of dollars in a machine on the greed that we're going to win, that you're going to hit that big one, or play the state-sanctioned lottery to help the senior citizens? Everything is to help the senior citizens. Young people today must hate senior citizens like me, something fierce, because everything they pay for is to benefit me as a senior citizen. Liar, liar, pants on fire. And so as long as the casinos are making big bucks, as long as the movies are generating $55 million on opening night for a movie and then generates millions of dollars throughout its run at the theaters, you're going to pay $4 for a gallon of gasoline. Now, maybe you don't go to the casino. Maybe you don't go to the up-class restaurant. Maybe you don't go to the movie. The other thing is we have these technological whizzy push-button things, the iPod, earphone, deep, the boop, pa. Everything is so electronic. Wouldn't you love a business where they stand in line at 4 o'clock in the morning so you could buy this piece of junk? For some reason or other, I survived fantastically without any of it. Now, young people are so technologically brilliant that it frightens me. If there was going to be a terrorist attack, I wouldn't blow up a nuclear power plant. I wouldn't do any of that. Just knock out the electrical system, knock out the electrical grid in America. Without all of these whizzy-bangies and pushy buttons and cell phones and peepers and poppers and blackberries and blueberries and greenberries, America would be so disarmed it would be impossible for it to function. And so I'm happy that the rest of the world, our enemies, are now learning about this electronic wizardry, because it will make it a lot easier for America to knock out the energy supply in Iran, China, India, wherever we have a common enemy. They won't be able to function. Knock out 3 red lights on Broad Street and you have a panic. Overturn the tractor trailer on I-95 both directions, and you can screw up Philadelphia for the rest of the summer. So we spend billions and billions of dollars when the terrorists can create more terror with the simple things of life than you can with all of this electric whiz-bang that's going on. And of course, one of the other things that happened this week, in addition to the comment made by Elmer Fudd, Phil Graham, about America's leading whiners, who once again, I'll give you their names: Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, Laura Ingraham, Ann Coulter, Dom Giordano, Michael Savage. And Michael's just a whiner a little bit. He's getting, Michael, you're getting a lot better, I have to tell you. You really are getting a lot better. You're getting boring, but a lot better with this silly nonsense that you're doing in the morning now. I don't know, try and imitate Imus, I suppose. You'll never make it. But a statement made by Jesse Jackson about Barack Obama. What is the big deal? What is the big deal if Jesse Jackson said they ought to cut, since I can say it on television, it's my show, he wanted to cut Barack Obama's nuts off. A lot of people don't even know what that means. What's the big deal? Did you ever go to a baseball game, a basketball game, a hockey game, and hear the language that is at these sports games? Go into a sports bar, even some restaurants where the language is way beyond what I want my wife to hear. So big deal. Jesse Jackson is a human being. He's no different than you and me. So he made a statement and the microphone was on. Oh, clergyman said, people are human beings. I'm sure he's sorry he said it. I'm sure he's sorry that his microphone was on when he said it. But I thought it was very funny, because if he did cut Obama's nuts off, his voice would go up about 6 volumes. He'd probably become a soprano. So look at what we're making issues of. A statement made by Phil Gramm, Elmer Fudd, and Jesse Jackson generates all of this interest and screaming and yelling on 50,000 watts of radio, 600 radio stations on one program, 400 on another, because a guy said that another guy should have his nuts cut off because he made a statement he didn't agree with, and the other guy said that we're in a mild recession and we're a nation of whiners. As far as a nation of whiners are concerned, if any of you were ever in the military, one of the statements made by people in command was always this: when they're bitching, they're happy. Now, where the whining becomes a threat is when whiners start taking action. And why do I say that? When the people whined about child labor in America, they took to the streets. When blacks got tired of sitting on the back of the bus and going to segregated schools, they were whining. But when they took to the streets, and that whining became anarchy, that whining became a threat to the system, that's when whining becomes a threat. As long as we're whining, as long as you boobuses out there are whining, the system is perfectly safe. But if there would be a national strike in America for one day, where no energy would be used, or energy would be used at a minimum, the whining and crying about the cost of food, the whining and crying about the cost of gasoline, the whining and crying about the cost of utilities, the whining and crying about the cost of mortgages would suddenly be reversed. So be thankful that Phil Gramm said that we're a nation of whiners. As long as you whine about taxes being too high, as long as you whine about the fact that in Philadelphia a proposal is being made that you may have to pay for your trash, the system is safe. But suppose you all dumped your trash in the middle of City Hall courtyard in opposition to the cost of paying for trash collection. That is action. When women wanted the right to vote, they took to the streets. When unions, when working people in America wanted to get a fair wage for a fair day's work, they took to the streets. They stopped whining. The power brokers in America and the politicians know that as long as the public is whining, they're safe. They are safe. It's when they stop whining and start acting, they're in trouble. The Vietnam War went on and on and on and on and on, and when the people took to the streets and when the college campuses rose up, then the war came to an end. And why didn't we win the war? Why didn't we win Korea? The United Nations didn't give us permission to do it. Any more than the United Nations will not give us permission to go into Pakistan to get Osama bin Laden. And I go back to my dear friend Michael Smerconish. Michael, please get a copy of the UN Charter and read it. And then you won't be so frustrated in the morning and get your people in the morning so upset. And you won't, even John McCain didn't have the answer to Michael when he was questioned. John McCain, who was a prisoner of war for 6 years, a presidential candidate, could have responded very simple to Michael Smerconish in an interview conducted about 2 weeks ago. Michael, I as the president am obligated and obliged to follow every treaty that America signs. And we signed the UN agreement. The UN says we're not permitted to go into Pakistan. And as a president or a presidential candidate, I will not be permitted to violate that treaty. Congress can then hold me in contempt. Even McCain didn't know the answer to it, which was frightening to me, more frightening than the fact that Barack Obama may be a newcomer who I question his ability to be the President of the United States. But then again, now I question John McCain's ability to be the President of the United States. Or senators. My theory is, folks, that old people forget and young people don't know. So when a presidential candidate like John McCain doesn't know the reason we can't go into Pakistan after Osama bin Laden, it gives me a little fear as to what else don't you know, John. As I said, I don't care who runs for office. I want to know who controls the money of this country. Because the one who controls the money of this country is the one who calls the tune. Not the politicians. And the reason the politicians don't run the country is because they need the people with money to get that money so they can run for office. It is an utter disgrace, ladies and gentlemen, that the elections in this country, and I'll say it real slow, because it is a disgrace, for the elections in this country to cost them millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars that are being spent in the primary elections and in this presidential election. And every day, according to polls, we have another election. Who won today? Did Obama win today? Did McCain win today? Well, let's see the poll tomorrow. John belched. Obama sneezed. Jesse said something. Phil said something. Another poll today. Another poll tomorrow. Aren't you tired of this yet? Aren't you fed up with this yet? Aren't you disgusted with this constant day after day after day after day? You mean to tell me we can't put a cap? 90 days, 120 days, 6 months for campaigning? Between the computer, the technology, the airplanes, the transportation system, massive communication, why is it necessary to conduct these campaigns day after day after day after day, year after year after year after year? By the time the election is over, folks, in November, and the inauguration will be in January, these two candidates, regardless of which one wins, are going to be so physically and mentally exhausted, they're going to need at least 6 months to recuperate. And I will go back to World War II, when General MacArthur, who was the chief commander in the South Pacific, was sent troops who were desert trained for fighting in the South Pacific. We had most of our training going in for Europe and in Africa, but training in South Pacific was something else. By the time he got those troops, he had to give them a month's rest because they were worn out. They were so exhausted from training, he couldn't put them in combat. And so the whole revision to the training program of America was give them a minimum amount of training, how to protect, how to kill, how to fight, get them over there as soon as possible, let the commanders over there train them. And so the troops were too exhausted to fight. Well, our presidential candidates are going to be so exhausted, both mentally and physically, by the time either one is elected to the President's office of the United States, excuse me, they won't be able to administer. They won't be able to pick a cabinet. They won't be able to deal with the world events that are going on. It isn't going to happen. Very interesting death this week of a guy who I really liked as a journalist and as a broadcaster and as a writer, all-around nice guy. And that was Tony Snow. For those of you who watch television, listen to radio, Tony Snow, in my opinion, lost his credibility when he became press secretary for President George Bush. When he became the press secretary for George Bush, in my opinion, he threw away all his credibility, all his honesty, all of his integrity, and became a Washington prostitute. Do I still like Tony Snow? Yes. Do I still admire him? Yes. Do I think he was a credit to the broadcast and the journalist industry? Yes. But his credibility when he became the White House press secretary for George Bush just went down the tube. I know people well qualified to be press secretaries, people who are in this business who lie, twist the truth, create misinformation, have no information whatsoever. However, Tony Snow, rest in peace, my dear friend. However, you're going to have to explain, if there is a God, you're going to have to explain to him, why'd you sell yourself out when you became the press secretary? This has been an experiment, ladies and gentlemen. I see by the viewer scan that there are 14 viewers watching this. Doesn't bother me, because anything in its infancy takes time to get off the ground. There are many, many areas I want to go into, which I will go into probably in the future. This may be a daily thing, it may be a weekly thing, probably be maybe every other day. I'm going to pick on the broadcast industry. I'm going to pick on it because it needs picking on. And I will pick on this industry because it's an industry that was very good to me when the radio station that I worked on for 25 years presented a fair balance of broadcasting all day long. From conservative to liberal, to middle of the road, to liberal, to conservative, to both sides, to information. The disgrace of radio today and the broadcast media is a total and complete disgust. I've just been informed that over the period of this hour, there have been 57 people tuning in to hear, which I think is really amazing, since we only notified about, 100 people, Ron? About that. There'll be more programming like this because it is necessary. But don't think this program is for entertainment because of any money, anything other than getting information to you that I feel you're not getting. And you're not getting it because I know it. I know that no one has ever called Smirkanish to tell him to read the UN Charter. I know that not anyone ever called Limbaugh, Hannity, Ingram, Coulter, Giordano, Michael Savage a whiner. Without whining, they're not in business. So Phil Graham, otherwise known as Elmer Fudd, if you think for 1 minute that you insulted the liberals, you insulted your boys on the right. Am I a liberal? I don't know. Am I conservative? Oh, yeah. Am I liberal with some things? Oh, yeah. Why anyone, once again, ladies and gentlemen, in my opinion, would want to put a label on yourself when I can destroy your liberal label and I can destroy your conservative label, absolutely boggles my mind. We didn't get into the theory of religion, which is something we're going to get into. We're going to get into government waste and government spending and government arrogance. We're going to get into the medical profession. We're going to get into the high cost of health care. We're going to get into the hypocrisy of spending $4 for a cup of coffee and then complain about $4 for a gallon of gasoline. I understand Starbucks is closing some 600 locations, but don't feel sorry for them. If they had any sense, they made enough money from you suckers out there paying $4 and $6 for a cup of rotten, ugly, bitter-tasting coffee. They don't care. They got you. You already paid your dollars. You already drank that slop. So go to Wawa. Go to 7-Eleven. Get yourself a cup. I got a better idea. Why don't you get your wife up to make you a cup of coffee in the morning? And for you henpecked guys like me, why don't you make a cup of coffee for yourself and for your wife? I'm Irv Homer, and as the great Marvin Burek used to say in his broadcast career, right now, I ain't got nothing more to say.